Welcome to the Ting Comic and Graphic Arts Festival here at TAP. Our program tonight is Unscripted. It's a discussion, a good dialogue, a rich dialogue with Jason McLean and Josh Lambier. The session will be about an hour and we'll be able to then view some of the work in behind us. But welcome to TAP. If you have any questions about what's happening the rest of the festival, we've got some brochures at the entrance. And so you can find out what's happening for the last week, which we wrap up May the 13th. Okay, I'm handing it over to Josh.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And thanks for everybody for joining us here on site and online, everybody who's joining us via Zoom today. Thanks so much for waiting us while we settled the room down. I would really like to thank our hosts here for bringing us the unscripted edition at the Ting Festival. We haven't had a chance to do an unscripted at Ting Fest since the beginning of the pandemic. So this is a real honor and a treat to be back doing this as part of the Ting Festival. And we're going to be talking today with Jason McLean, who's joining us to explore his relationship to the rich history of zines, comics, cartoons, and the graphic arts in Southwestern Ontario. To begin, however, I'd like to really extend a warm note of thanks to the organizers of Ting Festival, Deanna Tamblin and Sandra DeSalvo, who is just here, as well as Sarah Legault and the team here at TAP for inviting me to be part of the festival again this year. My name is Josh Lambier, and I'm the Director of the Public Humanities at Western, as well as the Artistic Director of Words, London's Literary and Creative Arts Festival. We're gathering today a few blocks away from the forks of Deshkan Zibi, or Antler River, also known as the Thames River to many in London, on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Lenapuwak, and Chinookan peoples. In the London area, we're governed by various treaties. There were the Treaty 6 London Township, the Treaty 7 Sombre Township, Treaty 21 Longwoods. This land continues to be home to diverse Indigenous peoples whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and the water and as vital contributors to our community and to the arts community here in London in particular. Now, to start us off, London's zine culture and history has a long, long history, one that in many ways documents the official and the unofficial history of the arts and culture in the city. We could trace the literary histories of London through Western's Folio magazine, running from 1947 to 1968, which featured the first publication of Nobel Prize winner Alice Munro, whose short story, The Dimensions of a Shadow, was published in the April edition of 1950. Not everybody knows that Alice Munro was a student here at Western and in London in the 1950s. Running shortly thereafter, James Rainey was publishing Alphabet, which featured local upcoming writers, but also the likes of Margaret Atwood, Bill Bissett, and B.P. Nicol. Or alternatively, we could trace the emergence of London regionalism through the zine Region, born alongside of Region Gallery. 20 Cents magazine, one of the first DIY magazines in Canada, also documents the literary and artistic history of London with a shorter lifespan between 1966 and 1970, roughly the same time period as the 2020 Gallery. The zine featured many of the leading lights of London regionalism, such as Bernice Vincent, Herb Arris, Ross Woodman, Ray Davis, James Rainey, Michael Ondaatje, and George Bowering. Within this ferment of London creativity, we should also highlight the genesis of Brick magazine in 1977 under the editorship and creation of Stan Draglin, who sadly passed away a few months ago, just before he was supposed to visit us here as part of the Rainey Memorial Lecture. And I see James Rainey here with us today. But he passed away, and we had somebody read in his stead. Though no longer based in London, Brick is still one of the flagship literary journals, and it had its genesis here. Above and beyond the lit zines and art zines of the regionalist movement, I would also highlight the comic and graphic art scenes that emerged in the 1990s, particularly in the case of a younger group of artists who are studying at Beale Art. This is where Jason McLean had his start. Mark Bell was publishing his early cartoon and comic zine, like the Mojo Action Companion Unit, which is here.
Yes, we have a
It's,
few,
I was blown away. I've never
Yeah,
seen
they're-
an
they're
actual original of
older,
this.
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll be able to talk about this. At the same time, Billy Burt Young, Aidan Urquhart, Peter Thompson, and many others who have been Ting Fest artists at TAP Center for Creativity were also graduates of this illustrious program. So I'm swiftly tracing through the history of London's zine and comic arts culture, and you're no doubt noting dozens of examples that I've missed, and my reverence and apologies to everybody I've missed, but I have a feeling we're gonna cover some of those along the way today, which is all to say that the cultural and artistic history of London is intimately tied to the creation of zines and comics, those hard to define artifacts of material culture that tell the stories, often the hidden stories of our community. But what relationship is there between comics, zines, and the visual arts in Southwestern Ontario today? Whether or not there is a direct line of influence from earlier London movements, how are artists in our community redefining the boundary lines and liminal spaces between these artistic forms? And how are these forms being reimagined? To help me fill in those gaps today, we have with us, and maybe take us in new directions, we have Jason McLean. He is a multidisciplinary artist who attended London's storied Beal Art program before moving west to complete a degree at the Emily Carr Institute of Art and Design. Jason is quite restlessly nomadic, though in recent years he spent his time between Brooklyn, New York, and London, Ontario. He is widely known for his mixed media drawings, mind maps, and paintings, though he has done extensive work with sound, sculpture, bookmaking, zines, postal or correspondence art, performance, and curatorial explorations, including a very intriguing Pez collection and museum he curates with his sons, Felix and Henry. Jason's immersive artwork pulls the viewer into a world animated by his experiences and perceptions, with a unique and often autobiographical visual language that includes careful annotations, bright colors, lines of flight, and personal observations. Though there is so much to cover in Jason's body of work, today we're going to focus our attention on his relationship to cartoons, comics, zines, and the graphic illustration of Southwestern Ontario. Please help me in welcoming Jason McLean. Okay, so I thought I'd kick us off, giving a bit of a background just to set things up and set a stage. But I thought maybe we could start with your time at Beal Art, this legendary program of London, Ontario. And I mentioned some of the graduates here. And I wondered if you could start us off with some of your thoughts and reflections on the experience of being at Beal Art.
Well, I'd probably have to say Joseph Hubbard was probably my instructor, my sculpture instructor, and he also taught drawing. Was one of the big influences on a whole circle of us. You know, getting humor introduced to art and like showing us the early comic-based work and humor-based work like H.C. Westerman, Saul Steinberg, Robert Crumb was known widely with his comics. But so she's probably one of the big influences on a whole of Mark and I and Billy. I'm sure Billy Burt. I think Billy had him as a teacher. He's really, he came from Chicago, so he had a introduction to some of the Chicago circle. So it was a big influence, and like he showed us out the Harry Hu and Art Green, who lives in Stratford, Ontario. So there was a lot of information we were getting at a very young age.
Yeah.
So, but it was I still stay in touch with a lot of people from Beal these days, you know. So it had an extremely big impact. We had a lot of fun. We had a lot of parties, and a lot of gatherings, and a lot of fundraisers, and yeah. I mean, it really set the tone for you're an artist. You know, they taught us that we were artists. You know, right from like when you started, like you were an artist, and they would get us to I don't know. They would get us showing early on. They would learn us business practices of artwork. They give us a real balance of the complete picture, almost more so than when I first started going to community college in Vancouver.
Right.
they really set you up for going out into the world of showing and interacting with the community.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Harry Who, and I think this is a really important example because there's something of a collective in it, and I think there's almost seeds here of some of the work that you would do with your group. Can you tell us a little bit about why the Harry Who in particular was?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I know bits and pieces about the Harry Who, and some people you might know them. But it's a Chicago-based imagists group, and there's some Canadian crossover. And Greg Curneau from London here, he was corresponding with them, and they were supposed to show in London, but
oh wow,
I can't remember the whole story. Maybe there's someone here that might know, but I think they were going to show it, I believe maybe at Region or 20 Cent Magazine or 20 Cent Gallery.
Oh wow.
And something happened where I can't remember if the gallery ended or but yeah, there are cases and their ephemera, their zines they'd make and their little sculptures, and like a lot of the ephemera or printed matter work was heavily influenced on me and a circle of people, and some of them I've met now, and some of them have passed on, and but the colors and the cartoon imagery, and I know Amy Lockhart that lived here for quite a while was probably pretty influenced by some of them, and Mark Bell especially. So Mark was actually, talking about BO, Mark was actually the reason why I started doing little publications and little zines.
Oh, we're going to get into that.
Yeah. So
that's amazing. And you'd mentioned Art Green, and Art Green was one of the members. And this group, as I understand, I had to look it up a little bit in terms of just when I was exploring for today. They were recent graduates of the Chicago Art Institute, and Art Green, as you say, settled. I think he was a professor at the University of Waterloo. Did you ever have a chance to meet him?
Yeah, Art would come to some of the Michael Gibson openings, and people wouldn't know who he was. And I was like, Art Green's here, I was like, and I would get him, and we hung out in New York too. He was doing shows in Chelsea. I've hung out with him a couple times, I believe, in New York, and he'd give me catalogs, and he'd have like an ice cream truck outside his show, and there'd be tickets, and he'd be, it'd be pretty. He was a big deal,
Yeah.
And he'd show at Matthew Mark's gallery, with Mike Kelly and all these wonderful artists, and here he was just this person in the room, and this anyway. But yeah, he settled in the Kitchener, Waterloo area in Stratford, and so he's it's I should have contacted him. I had a show recently in Stratford, and I forgot to contact him to come to the show. I don't know what I was thinking about, but sometimes too much too fast. But yeah.
That's amazing. So you mentioned Mark and your peer group and your peer circle, which you mentioned Joseph Hubbard was really influential from that curriculum side, from the teachers that you had.
Yeah.
But your peer group, I would say, was as or maybe even more influential from your Beale time. And I was wondering if you could talk about that influence, and maybe even to focus it a little bit, I thought I would mention one place in particular is Bob's Big Boy restaurant. Why was this place in particular?
It was Elias Big Boy, and my brother and his wife Kim we were recently out there, and Sunnyside, I believe, or Sunny. So-side. Yeah, it's the building's still there, and we used to go. A group of us, Jason Bellchamber, Mark Bell, Peter Thompson. We used to go out there, and they used to have a comic book, like it was Elias Big Boy.
Yeah,
and they all had different first parts. There's Bob's Big Boy in Burbank.
Yeah,
and we used to draw over top of the comic books that they would hand out at the Delaware, and they were mainly for kids. And we used to sit in the restaurant, and we drink lots of coffee late at night. We'd take the bus partway out there, and I think we had to walk a little bit too. It didn't quite go out there, and then we weren't sure how we were getting home. But we would collage. We'd bring our ink and scissors, and I can't remember exactly the whole story. It's been so long ago. What's that? Oh, at Bob's Elias Big Boy, the restaurant. It was off on Wellington. And so basically we would make artwork in the restaurant, and then sometimes early zines I made was like based on Big Boy, and it was a submission based thing. Robert Dayton, who's part of these, and there was a whole bunch of us that we would get to do themes on Big Boy, and and that was sometimes a little bit later. But we did a lot of work about Bob's Big Boy, and we would pretend there was something about him that we would look through the parking lot. If there was American tourists that were in the parking lot, we would pretend we were American, or like I can't remember. It was something to do with like kind of like not anti-American, but it was like something to do with we had a lot of fun, you know, and it was just a little Dadaist kind of like nonsensical humor and stuff. But when we knew in the David Lynch.
Right.
I think we knew at that time that David Lynch, the filmmaker, he was inspired heavily by Big Boy. And in the early years when I first moved to Vancouver, this is stretching on a bit, but
no, this is great. I love it.
But I went to Bob's Big Boy in Burbank a few times,
right.
and we'd take photos and I'd look for him in the restaurant, and they had car shows and stuff. And like, I mean, I grew up, that's a whole other thing, the car business and cars and various things. But yeah, it was fun. I had Big Boy painted on my wall when I first above my bed, and spray paint, and it's a long story. I almost got a tattoo of Big Boy.
Did you really?
Yeah, I never did, but yeah.
There's always time.
Yeah, big one on the back. Yeah, no. I thought I wasn't sure about that, but yeah.
But you know, I find that really fascinating because everybody remembers that iconic Big Boy with the hamburger in his hand.
Yeah, you know, I think they're taking the character of Big Boy away, and it's going to be Dolly now. It's going to be running the restaurant, his girlfriend. So, yeah, there's a change. So
handoff. Yeah. The handoff of the burger.
There was always the influence of Michigan, you know, in the region, you know, because of Big Boy and Ohio.
Yeah, like Southfield.
Yeah,
too,
I went to a golf tournament one time with my dad in the PGA in Ohio, and it was sponsored by Big Boy, and I just loved that. You know, I don't know if they had food there of it, but it was, it was in some, you know, Robert Dayton, who did some of the zines here, he's in LA now living, and he performed at Michael Gibson. He's interacted with the community quite a bit, but he did some research on the early cartoonists of Big Boy comic, and there was something he discovered, and I wasn't exactly sure what Robert, he really digs, you know.
Yeah.
You know, with the history of writers and cartoonists and musicians and.
Yeah. So at this time, though, when you were meeting with your peer group at this particular place, as I understand it, you had kind of gone into Beale with sculpture and maybe graphic design and animation, but it wasn't necessarily drawing at this point in time. Was it something in the work with those?
I remember we talked a little bit when we first started talking about what we were on the phone, but like about. I would do high realism drawings, and then I got into kinetic sculpture, like sculpture with motion, and was really influenced by like Jean Tangeley and like the kind of assemblage sculpture and like, but so I kind of was just mainly doing sculpture because Joseph was the sculpture teacher, Joseph Hubbard, and he heavily influenced me. But he would get me. I mean, I know some of these references some people might know and some people might not, but. You know, pop art and funk art and like soft sculpture and like I made a giant toaster chair, and the crazy thing was I made this not knowing it would not fit in my apartment, so and anyway it was quite big, you know, like, and it was, you know, it had a wooden frame, and then it had a metal tin plate all on it, and like a toast that you'd sit on, and it folded down, and I was trying to put some sort of blanket that went through it so you'd have heat on the toast, and like, but it ended up at a theater company on Richmond Street. I think it's Toboggan now. There was a theater downstairs, so I have no idea where it went. And I saw it being taken off in a truck, but it was influenced by Klaus Oldenburg.
Right. I
worked on this thing for like 8 or 9 months, and I kind of gave up on it, and it had like a plug and fiberglass and but I stopped doing the sculpture as much. I had issues. I had a collapsed lung when I was younger, and a lot of things changed with thinking about mortality and life and death and like time and limited time on earth and like various things, and like, so I was really careful not to work with like resins and like, and I was really scared of welding. Like when this is stretching it out a little bit, but at art school in Emily Carr, when they would do welding, I would just go and I'd leave and I wouldn't go to the class, and I'd just go watch videos and VHS videos on Warhol or something.
Right.
So
I remember hearing Ross Woodman talk about whether the silver paintings that Jack Chambers used to do, whether that had an impact on his health.
Yeah.
But to kind of drill down a little bit here, one of the things I was wondering too is, were you, because we were looking at comics and zines, were you and Mark Bell and that group, were you looking at comics? Were you going to comic book stores? What was that like amongst that group?
I mean, we would go to a lot to record stores. I think we went to the record, Dr. Disc and the Record Dealer and some of those places in London, and they had zines and stuff there. I think they had some Raymond Pettibone zines, which I don't know if some of you know Raymond, but I know Raymond a little bit. Well, I know him a bit. He thought my name was David, but David McLean. But we get along fine. He's an eclectic guy. He's very successful. But anyway, he's the real deal. But he would do the zines, the Black Flag. He did the Black Flag logo and Sonic Youth Goo covers, and he's done stuff for the Foo Fighters and like so much stuff. But he would do these zines. They're worth a fortune now. But I did hear something about his nephew getting the originals and bootlegging them or something when he looked after his place. I don't know. But anyway, these zines would be around and we'd see them. And I'd go to a few different comic book stores in London. And mainly Mark Bell was making, he started at Saunders, I believe. And he was making zines. And when we first went to Beale, he would show me these photocopied books. And so he heavily influenced me on that. And
yeah, that's interesting. I was going to ask you about this. So I had a chance, Jason, when I was talking to him to prepare, mentioned that he has this archive at Western. And I went in after I ordered the archive to come up to the reading room. And I walked into the reading room and they looked at me like, oh, he's the guy who's got the boxes, because over in the corner of the room, there's like 10 boxes of material that was from Jason's archive. But I found in there, I was leafing through, it took me about 5 hours. I found this one folder that said my first zine, and it's marked 1994. Yeah. So if you think about it, you've been making zines for 30 years.
I know.
So what drew you to, now you mentioned Mark, but what drew you though to zines as being something that was such an important genre?
I guess they were like kind of like idea books in some ways, but it was initially they were collaborative. I would get people to contribute to them, and then that became a lot of work to organize, and then you print and you'd have to get people copies of things I don't know. I mean, I was talking to my friend Michael Sinkin, and his brother, I think, printed my first zine. I think my first zine was printed in London while I was living in Vancouver, down on Richmond Street. And it became a format that was very accessible. Sometimes in the earlier years, I would spend a lot on color copying. We would work at Shoppers Drug Mart a lot in Vancouver, and the color copying just came inexpensive, and it was very low tech. And we'd go to Shoppers and we'd put everything on top of the table of the copier, and we'd get stuff from the store and we put it on top, and like chips and like crackers, and like we just make these one-off collages. And it was really fun. We were making band posters. I mean, there was just something about the zine culture, not like we were punks or anything, because I was never really a punk, but it was the immediacy of or having lots of things to give away, I was always, and even still to this day, I'll go to events all the time with a bag, and like I'll have like records or zines or like Cough Park, compact disc, my audio project I do. Like it's like someone's like, sometimes people would say I was a bit of a huckster or something, but like, but I'd always have something to give away, and like.
And you were sending them through mail, because I think Mark went to the other side of the country.
Postal mail, yeah. So I mean, I did years and years of a postal mail, and I still do it occasionally. And I get people writing me occasionally, and like I would write some like obscure people, and like so we decorate all the packages. And before 9/11, it was easier to send really wild, like we'd send really wild packages through the mail, and you just get, sometimes you'd be like, what? Like you get to know your letter carrier. Actually, the one letter carrier, Bob, in Vancouver, we was addressed to Bob's Big Boy, and he thought he had put on too much weight. But yeah, and I changed the digits outside our house. I added an extra number to it, and it was just really, it was pretty. We just had a lot of fun, and like we'd have theme parties and all sorts of stuff. But the postal art was a big thing, and we were really influenced by Ray Johnson, the godfather of postal art, or you know, and like there was all sorts of different people, and I never met Ray, but anyway, there's yeah, I mean, you know, write people, and I still have sometimes certain letters of people like, they wrote you back, and I was like, and like, yeah, even like I wrote the local guy Dan the radio man, and I finally met him recently out at the Arc, at the Arc Mission, and I'd wanted to meet Dan for like 20 years, and I reckon anyway, I wrote him a letter, but I sent him a CD in the mail, and he didn't remember, but
and what I really love is the way in which these different formats built community for you, and that group that you're working with. So you're now in Vancouver and you're doing album art. I wonder if you mentioned album art in a remark, and I thought this would be a nice place to actually ask you about the All-Star Schnauzer Band. Can you talk about the All-Star Schnauzer Band?
Well, you know, that started in Beale, and in the late 80s, and it was the kind of, I guess technically it was a hoax that became reality in some ways, but we would submit to music directories and do gigs that were canceled, and then events with food, and we did a parade down Hastings Street in Vancouver, and with a waffle queen and Fozzie Bear and like a Japanese flute player, and I was on a motorcycle with like prop suitcases and helmets, and then we had the July 4th toilet. They played the Waffle Queen anthem, and Maura, who did some of these books, Momo Bunny Lips and Annie Dunning, they had a Polynesian breakfast, and we had two French Canadian cooks working these sirens when waffles were made, and it was kind of like the waffle was kind of like a protest, but we had a lot of fun. Like we just had these themes that we'd run on, and characters, and you know, it still appears all in Mark Bell's comics, and like because he does graphic novels and comics like all over the world, and so he would occasionally get me to write a little bit for like something about like a mini golf course hole or something based on the Schnauzer Band. But yeah, it was just we would submit to Seattle, to the music directory, and then we'd get record label people calling us. This is all pre-internet, right? And that's a whole other thing too, the pre-internet and postal art. Like a lot of people don't understand, and like because we would send a lot of these little books through the mail, and like it was a lot of fun. You know, basically you wouldn't be able to keep track. Well, some of you definitely would remember, like before the internet, you wouldn't know, like if someone was traveling and they sent you a letter, like you were like, well, that's where they are now. They're in Calgary on someone's couch or something. And like, and you mean, it wasn't like today where you could just talk to them over video on your phone, you know? And we would travel long distances over the Greyhound, some of us, and like go back and forth and like see shows. And people, this is stretching a little bit away from your question, but you would develop community by, you know, these little books would, you know, be in people's bathrooms or coffee tables or in clubs and like zine directories. And like, so you'd meet people and they knew who you were, but they had never met you. Yeah. You know,
so you did find some of these.
Yeah. But then a lot of it did tie in through music, with music packaging. In Vancouver, I started hanging out around this record store, Scratch Records, a lot. My friend Sandy Kilby was part owner of it, and in Vancouver, and she's very good friends with Robert Dayton. And I tied into a whole early community of like handmade record art. Like I did stuff for this band Pork Queen that was early involved, being promoted through Sonic Youth and a Sonic Death magazine and like the zine, and like there was all sorts of San Francisco stuff in Portland and LA, and then I went on music tours and like with roadieing a little bit and with a Japanese noise band and like and early days of Beck and various, it was all so much stuff.
So noise bands, just to pull in
like
that
Japanese noise, and we were really influenced by Mark and I, especially by the boredoms or some of the Japanese packaging of like Japanese take on punk in some extent, and pop punk kind of Japanese style. And then we were meeting a lot of people in Vancouver from Japan that would come over, and generally, sometimes they'd speak no English, and we would talk through names of architects or artists or musicians. Like I went on tour with this band Amoy de Hataba and members of the Boredoms, the guitarist Sichi Yamamoto's band, and a lot of them had played in like with Nirvana, and when Nirvana went to Japan, and they had a big following, and they played with John Zorn and some of the Runes projects and like certain crossover things. So it was really interesting. We would communicate, and I went on tour with them, like a 16-day tour, and none of them spoke English. And I was supposed to drive. That's a whole other story. But that was actually the last time I ever drove, was in Tucson, Arizona.
That sounds like a story to be mine, but we might have to put that one off camera.
There was no substances involved or anything like that. But,
I was worried there might be.
No. That was a different trip.
That was a different trip. Okay.
Yeah, that was the Route 66 trip. So
and I don't know whether maybe this is just me interpolating this in, but noise bands and that influence, and was the Nihilist Spasm Band ever in there as being something that...
Yeah, we mentioned them, like, I mean, in the early years, with Beale, learning, and even in South High School, learning about the Nihilist Spasm Band and the Talbot Block and some of the galleries, and even Michael Gibson's gallery with the miniatures show he would do, and like, but the Spasm Band, I used to go out to the Embassy Cultural House, not a lot, once or twice. I think I see Eric Stack, Free Music Unit, and the Nihilist Spasm Band, and we just thought they were like I don't know, cat's pajamas, you say, but like, and but Bill Exley would be out there banging his vacuum cleaner tubes together, and then you'd go
ball bearings and pots.
Yeah, and actually, I can't remember. But then I would hang out with the Croneau kids, with Zoe and Owen, and I later worked with Galen at a bakery in Vancouver. And but I would go out to the old Forest City Gallery on the east side, and I always thought like Owen and Zoe were so cool because they were like they'd be like having purple and like leather jackets and listening to industrial music and stuff, and I was kind of like an outcast a little bit, and I was trying to be involved with the circle, but the Spasm Band, a huge influence. Actually, we used to take the record out from the library, and I think we took it out of my mom's library card, and we had a huge late fee, and we had defaced the record and put the All Star Schnauzer Band on it and returned it, and it's worth a fortune. And then wherever we go, and then Kellen that's here, he made a Nihilist Spasm Band shirt, and it was a little tight on me, so I gave it away. And my friend Alden, and he's a musician in New York, and he's a Canadian, but he would wear it, and people would approach him on the street and, "Oh, you from London, Ontario?" Or like they'd know the band, or it was just always, there was always these people that knew about the Spasm Band everywhere you went, so, but and
the close connection to regionalism. And I know this is a question that you've been asked many times. I think it's helpful to insert. Was London regionalism something that was really influential?
Well, I think it was stuff like the writer George Bowring in his book, The Mustache, probably was like one of the big, there was certain books, I'd read about the local things, or like the Bucksbaum case, which is pretty dark to talk about, but like, reading about local history and like local locations, and like, realizing you didn't have to look to the larger centers. There was stuff going on here that was just as significant. Yeah. And then I find in some ways, wherever I live now, I get involved with the local history, and I sometimes, when I talk about Canada a lot in the United States, it's like, not like it's frowned upon, but we had someone from Estonia over for dinner at Christmas. I think it was Christmas one year. She was just talking about how great Estonia was and like all this Estonian stuff. And I was like, "Oh, is this what I sound like to my American friends?" And it was like, "Oh, like maybe but but I love the regional and the stories, and James Reaney, like like so many, the Nardwar, like so many people have influenced me on like digging and real deep, like the fiddle player from the Beatles' White Album from London, or like all this great stuff. And like, it's just amazing. Like region, like learning about Walt Disney's family in the region.
Yeah.
And like I did this road trip with Jen Fraser the other day up to Goderich area, Blueville area, kind of like, and like just so much stuff. It just, yeah, it's every trip back is a different wave of research, like I guess research, or like having having fun. Like Billy Burt and I will drive around and like we'll research where Jack Chambers' grave was, and then we'll come across a few other things, and there'll be like world-class figure skaters in the same neighborhood, or we'll go see where Garth Hudson from the band, Bob Dylan's old band, like where he'd sung, it's now a Korean church, or like it's pretty wild, the roots here, like, and then it keeps going further and further back, like lately I've been researching, I mean, this is stretching away from comics and graphic novels, but Jack Bush, the Canadian painter, and his dad's ink business in London, and so the regionalism thing, it stretches around.
But they did have a cartoon aesthetic, and they were kind of the way in which pop art was pulling in that as well. And like, did that have an impact on you?
Influence on Greg Cournot's drawings, and is it Snore Comics, the little square books, and his illustrations. Some of them showed here actually when Greg did his had a show here. Yeah, and so that was.
And the art at the Heart of London catalog was a comic.
And his book covers too, and I did a show one time at the Landon Library called the Hugh Display Case, named after Hugh McIntyre from the Nihilist Spasm band who used to work there. And they had some like even Milton Acorn covers, and that Greg had done, and like I would order away for them, and I would never read them, but they were wonderful objects, and like the illustrations were amazing. Yeah, right. Like Greg's interest in the old hockey cards, and like it really varied. Yeah, there's a lot of history with and even some of Murray's drawing, Murray Favreau, and from the Spasm band, and like his technical drawings, and Art Pratton's instrument drawings, and like,
it strikes me, it's interesting that given the number of exceptional drawers around who are doing cartoons, that you didn't do a cartoon, though as I was going through Jason's archive, I did find one. I found one cartoon. It's about Karen Baldwin. Can you tell us about the Karen Baldwin
Karen
cartoon?
Baldwin, which
is a good tie to the local references.
I think I was trying to draw a comic. I remember in City Hall there was always a painting. I don't know if any of you remember that there was a Karen Baldwin painting in the lobby or something, and I always wondered where it went, and it seemed very LA or something, like the colors, and I was always, I think there was 2 Miss Universes.
Yeah. From the same high school. Yeah. And Michael Gibson has stories hanging out with Karen Baldwin, like riding in a limo together to Toronto or something. There's some stories, but anyway. But yeah, I was doing this story about Karen Baldwin, but I wasn't good at laying it out correctly, but it tied in with Guy Lombardo's Speedboat and like the Thames, and like, I don't know, there was Sammy
Slovaki, from the old hut that was here, and like, and
at Western's Frosh Week, I was trying to follow the comic. Yeah, do you know what though? One of the things I found really fascinating is that there's a Merle Ting worm in.
Really?
Exactly, Luke Worm is in your Karen Baldwin.
Comic. Wow, I'd forgotten about that.
So clearly you knew of Ting.
There's not many of those made. I think there's like 5 of those or something, but yeah.
But you must have known about Ting too then.
I mean, when I was a kid, when I grew up, I'd always read the Free Press. Generally I was a real sports fanatic, so I'd always read the hockey statistics. My dad would always take me to the hockey games and baseball games, and then I would always read. I sometimes read the stock market too, because I had stocks at a very young age. My stock didn't do very well though, but I think it was pretty brief. Like I don't know, it was a little. fall, I'd read the newspaper, and you wouldn't be able to stay up late at night a lot of the time. You had to go to bed, and and so you wouldn't know the outcome of the game. You'd try to listen to your room on the radio or something, or maybe the black and white TV if you could get the station. But showing my age.
It's interesting to pull us back to. I weirdly enough, I knew about Karen Baldwin because last year there was a London Free Press article on the 40th anniversary of her win, and there's this picture of Victoria Park, Victoria Park here, and there are thousands of people there to see Karen Baldwin in Victoria Park. It was a big, it was a huge deal for the city when she was Miss Universe.
Yeah, well, there was always things like that when I was younger. Like I did follow the Ting. I didn't answer your question, but the Ting worm. I would always look at the drawings and Herman Gooden and his face and like his little, and like there was this certain the Free Press. I grew up reading it, so but there was always these events that would happen in the history of my upbringing that I was really, they were, like there was just certain pop culture, like the tennis tournament in Brantford, the Wayne Gretzky tournament they would do, and like with tennis tournament, or like there'd be different baseball players that would come through. Like I was really interested in pop culture. I watched a lot of TV. Yeah. My brother and I, my brother's here, and we would watch hours and hours of TV and like game shows and like just everything. Love Boat, like just wrestling. I don't watch barely at all anymore, but I mean, it was just so much. Three's Company, like everything, like just. And I don't know, it became this like TV, person. Like I don't know describing it very well, but there's just,
and a lot of it makes it into those zines. When I was looking through some of those early, and it's very stitched in a personal way. But I wanted to because we have this amazing, and everybody's going to have a chance to see and chat with Jason about this zine collection. But I wanted to really drill down on how important zines were when you were in Vancouver. And I thought to give you some granularity to a question. In Vancouver, you're working on book and art zines with these close group of artists, and you organize a show called Nagadod, a pop art gallery at a pop art gallery named Moonbase. Yeah. And I found a review of this from 1999, and I want to read a passage just to give you a sense, because I think I thought this writer, Ryan Bigg, is his
Ryan.
You probably know the review that I'm talking about here.
It's been a while.
So I'm gonna read this because I think it's a really gives you a great picture of this time, Jason, and how you were working. So at the center of the festivities of this opening at Moonbase, which apparently, as he describes later in the article, is supposed to have space for about 15, and there's 50 people in this space. At the center of the festivities is artist and curator Jason McLean. Wearing dungaroo overalls and a bright red shirt, he vaguely resembles fast food icon Big Boy, callback, who not so coincidentally is one of Jason's creative muses. So this is 1999. This is two Big Boy references in one outing here. His friendly and calm demeanor masks the tremendous amount of organizational effort needed to ensure that deadlines were met. Over 50 different artists from across North America participated in the show. Still, it's probably worth it. Nagadod is serving more than a few purposes. It's making zinesters rethink their text as art. It's giving independent comic artists a wall to hang their work on. It's serving to legitimize the art book community that Jason and myriad collaborators have been helping to forge over the past 2 years, forcing zinesters and art onophiles to breathe the same air while providing everyone with a damn good time. So I think that's just such a great description, Big Boy image and all. But do you remember organizing this particular show? Can you take us back there?
Yeah, I mean, there was everyone in the show from like, it was a really broad range of show because my taste would be all over. Like I would have Fiona Smythe from Toronto, and like, I was a big fan, and there would also be like Brian Young, and who's very substantial Canadian artist who he's AGO sculpture up front and like in Toronto, and like but it was a broad range of styles, and like everyone had their zines, and they were behind a wire, and then there was an original piece above. but it was a lot of work to organize. It was almost 50 artists,
Yeah.
everyone, Sherry Boyle was part of it, who represented Canada at Venice. And like, there was, it was a real community. We had a couch in the space, and everyone dropped off their stuff at my place or mailed some stuff in. It was a real organizational. It was one of my early curation shows, but I don't think we had any live music at the opening. There was one opening where people dressed as giant tongues or something.
Of course.
Tongue doctor.
Yeah,
and
of course they did.
the guy that played Jeremy, who's on, what were they called? The Eye Lickers. Yeah, but anyway, there was a few events. My friend Mark Pilon from Vancouver worked. He ran Moonbase with Jody, his partner, and he was early tied in with Discorder magazine in Vancouver at CITR, and I volunteered up there. And also, well, he's more known now, but Nardwar worked up there, the Human Serviette, and so I got to know John or Nardwar quite well, and so I learned. I was working at a gallery around that time, and but the Moonbase, that was an early curation show, and there was a little bit of friction with some people being upset at how I didn't keep track of things correctly with giving the payment amount of their zines, because everyone would have zines to sell.
Right.
And so basically I got a little discouraged from curating a little bit, so I didn't do it for a while. But I never felt that strong about my writing, so I never felt I could be a good curator. So I had good ideas for curating, but I couldn't fulfill the whole picture, so.
Right.
But also one thing I was going to mention when you were talking, I was thinking about it, when we were making these books, there was nothing like them being made.
Yeah.
And they were known as Canadian books.
Right.
Like Ron Reger, who does these toys, he would call them Canadian books. And they were like quarter page stuff, and nothing had really been made like them before. And and we would send them off to, there was a thing called Broken Pencil magazine, and that the Canadian government or Ontario government would sponsor, and basically they didn't know how to classify them. They had different review sections, because a lot of people were doing zines to say about fixing your bike, or vegan recipes, or travel, but we were doing these nonsensical kind of Dadaist kind of zines, and they didn't know how to classify them. So oftentimes they wouldn't even review them. And Hal Nietzschevecki.
Oh, and Nedzvecki.
Yeah, he was the early person, and we always made jokes about Hal, and because he never understood us, but and then there was also that show when I was recently researching it for this talk, was Our Hero, which was a CBC show about zine culture that existed on CBC, and it's aired a little bit in the United States. And it was interesting, because I was telling a friend the other day that I was out making zines, and in the early days of going out with Heather we were boyfriend girlfriend at the time, my wife, and she said, well, where's Jason? He said, he's out making zines. And they're like, oh, just like the show on TV,
wow.
Yeah, so it's
Didn't know that.
Yeah, it only ran for 2 seasons.
Oh, I see. Yeah. But it points to something that you're describing, where they didn't know how to classify you, and you can hear it, and that's one of the reasons why I read Ryan's review, is that idea of legitimizing comics in the gallery, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder if you think back and whether you could remember, was the group that would go to the fine arts opening, were they also going to a show like this, or was there a divide between the two?
It would be tricky, beside the Moonbase gallery where we would do the show, there'd also be Monty Clark Gallery, or later the Aura Gallery, or some of these artist-run centers. And sometimes people would go in one place and they'd kind of look in the window, and they wouldn't go to the other place. But then you get a few crossover people,
right.
And it was like a level status thing, I was recently talking about lowbrow, and someone was really discouraged about that, but they thought it was a derogatory term. But I was like, no, there was lowbrow art, Juxtaposed magazine, the Robert Williams magazine, so there was different levels, but there was always entry points in for me through the higher art circles, through people that did DIY kind of do-it-yourself zines and such, and through the music community, and we were persistent, breaking new ground and introducing different communities. So, and the same thing goes on here. You know, you have the uptown scene at the university and the downtown scene and East Village or whatever. Like it's just, and then the mergers of things. Like sometimes the music community would bring together a branch point of things and like various things. So you'd meet people and people would get along and it wouldn't be quite as cliquey, you know.
Right. Well, and it's a perfect segue to the question I wanted to ask. When you moved back to Ontario and you came back, first Toronto, then London.
Yeah.
This was actually when I first started to see your work, which was at, say, Pulp Fiction at Museum London, 2008.
Yeah.
Not Bad for London, 2011 at Michael Gibson Gallery. And Ello Today in 2013. A group of many of the collaborators that were there were also collaborating with you in Vancouver, but they came here and started. Did you see a difference of reception for the art that you were producing here than in Vancouver? Was there?
Yeah, I mean, there's always, maybe it's not totally answering your question, but there's always been a connection between Ontario and the West Coast, you know, even going back to Roy Kayuka and like Greg Curneau hanging out or George Bowering and BP Nickel or Bill Bissett and like people traveling back and forth. So there was a linkage, but yeah, you know, I would, some of these people would come into town and we did, a Swiss Neves book launch here one time at the Blackshire, I think it was. The building's gone now, and I think like 4 people showed up, but it was like, it was Art Pratt and Paul Wald and Christine Wald and someone else. Like it was a great crowd, you know, people, really creative people, but it not, you know, it was really snowing and slushy, and I was telling everyone how great London was, and I was living in Toronto at the time, and they're like, okay, that's yeah, I mean, I would, if I showed people around when they came out here, or like, yeah, there was linkages, and sometimes the people would just send their work and they would, and the work would tour and stuff. But yeah, I mean, sometimes people would know each other through the zine community or art shows or music circles or in the early days of the internet. So yeah.
When you did return, I remember being here, and I remember there was quite a buzz about a new wave of regionalism, or
Sky Gooden was really pushing for that. Really,
yeah, heavy. And there was that.
And I was a little bit of hesitant about it because. I don't know if I thought it, and that wasn't like a cliche, but it just had been in, like when I left, people were talking about, you know, Chambers or Curneau or, you know, different facets of different shows and themes. And like, and when I came back, it was still the same canon, which was maybe fine, but like, so I wasn't sure if I was actually part of that, you know, and then especially living in the United States now, I mean, I don't know. I mean, those, you know, some of the people that were crossed in with that regional scene did go to the States, a few, you know.
Right.
Yeah. I was talking to Gerard Paz today, and I think he was mentioning Claude Breeze. This is stretching away from comics, but he had spent some time in New York too, which I didn't know about. So it's always interesting, you know, you break, you know, into the US a little bit, and then you come back and everyone listens to you a little more, you know. It's kind of.
Well, in your show like that you did,
Lightfoot or something, you know.
Well, I was just going to mention that
you read the story. You know, he saw his time in L.A. and like he was starting, and I was. This is stretching a little bit away, but he was talking about losing his Canadianism, and I often think about that. You know, like, you know, he would come back and he'd start going canoeing in Canada and stuff, and like, you know, like just but yeah, you kind of do change, and then you forget and you romanticize your past area where you've lived, and then you change as a person and the place changes. This city's not the same as it was 10 years ago too, you know.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting thing that you referenced Gordon Lightfoot, because your show at Macintosh Gallery, the show that when you were here was called If You Could Read My Mind. And in that show, we started to see the seeds of your restlessness, of thinking about your next move, which would have been to Brooklyn. Was it to not escape, but was it part of the discomfort of feeling like that regionalism discussion that was happening didn't really fit?
I always wanted to live in New York, even in the early years, even when I'd go to the New Yorker theater. I mean, it's maybe not in vogue to talk about it, but I would be into those Woody Allen movies and then, you know, watching Annie Hall or Manhattan and wanting to go to Central Park and be an old man and feed the birds or something. And like, but then, I got heavily into Warhol and Basquiat and like Jean-Michel Basquiat and like Andy Warhol. And then I always wanted to spend time in New York, and even in Vancouver, I wanted to live there. And then I had health issues, mental health issues, which I don't know if we'll talk much about, but like, I'm fine with talking about it. But, and there was never a chance to go to United States. And then by moving back here, it enabled us financially to keep our house here and be able to go to the United States. Because if I had stayed in Toronto or Vancouver, I would have probably never been able to make it to live in New York. And it hasn't been an easy go, but it's getting better and better. Like, I'm not that young anymore, but I mean, I kind of wish I had moved there when I was like 28, but maybe it would have gone in a different direction, I mean, some things, like I was like, this is a bit of a segue, but when I went to Europe for the first time, when I had an Italian dealer, like, I was glad I never wanted to go after school and go backpacking in Europe and do this classic thing, where it was almost like a cliche or something. I was very against doing something that the norm did or something. I don't know. Trying to be an individual, but.
Right. And I'm going to start to turn to everybody here if you have questions at some point in time, because I don't want to hog the floor. But Sandra at some point might have the microphone. Okay. But while we get ready for that, I wanted to actually take one of the examples that, well, and actually before that, it strikes me, I'm recalling something that you said earlier about regionalism as something that wherever you go, you kind of take regionalism with you in the sense that you look for the local, which is an interesting departure from the resistance maybe to those big centers or to the United States. I know in one of the zines you have that map that Greg Curnow drew of North America with Mexico stitched to the bottom of Canada. So, which gave a good view of the way that he regarded that. But it seems like your turn there is to take regionalism wherever you go. Because I see such passion when you're talking about something while in New York that has a Canadian reference or a Southwestern Ontario reference.
Even when my family and I briefly lived in LA for the winter, like I would work like Vaughn's, like the grocery store, which is kind of like a no frills type thing, into the artwork, or you do the Dodgers or local figures and the American stamps, or you can pick it up anywhere. You could go live in Chatham and you could reference certain things, or like, it doesn't have to be just London, and, and same thing in, something like Regina, like with Regina 5, or like just like everyone there's regional pockets everywhere with histories, and, but it branched out a bit too, from, I don't know, there's always more to it than it gets recognized, too. So, there's some things that make the history books and some things that don't. And like, sometimes you dig around a little bit more and you realize that's not exactly the whole story. So,
Right. One of the projects that you took from London to New York to give us a cartoon inflection is the Pez Museum with Henry and Felix. Can you talk about the Pez Museum?
Well, that started here with my kids, Felix and Henry. And we had a basement. Well, we started collecting them a little bit in Toronto. And basically, we didn't have a place for them, and we maybe had them in a box. And we had this basement room in our house, and one day we decided to set them up and use the room. And like, I think it was like bad weather or winter or something, and there was just an empty room in the basement, and we turned it and we started painting the walls and like decorating, and like we had this Pez dispenser, which is initially Austrian. I don't know if people know that. And then the head is added by the Americans, and the shaft part is made by a Holocaust survivor. And like, there's all these, when something's around that long, it's really interesting. But basically, we decorated that room up, and we got people from like the National Gallery, coming, and like Rick Rhodes, ex-Canadian art editor, and like, but we had this audio headset, and my parents would do art for the wall on Pez themes, and we had like vending machines the kids would make. And then I got later into getting autographs on Pez dispensers, which kind of, it was too weird for the art world. And I was getting like my nephew Jordan to sign one, and like I wanted everyone, right? It was like, I have a very addictive personality, but it's like the 500 Club where I got like people to sign the sides of Pez dispensers, and I was hanging out at like the Letterman show and 30 Rock and Carnegie Hall, and I got to meet, I never met Barack Obama. I was going to meet Michelle one time at a signing and like get her to sign a Barack Obama Pez. Yeah. But I realized anyone was approachable, and so sometimes Jen and I Jen Fraser, we would go around and we'd go on these excursions and we'd track down, and you go to launches or readings, and then it got to be the point where I was always having 3 or 4 in my pocket, and like I'd have stains from the Sharpies, and like I'd be hanging out and I'd be trying to get someone to sign, and they'd think it was a weapon, or like the stories like Yoko Ono, Regis.
Can you think of one that really stands out of like whether it was for good or ill?
Jeff Koons was one of the people. He was very nice, and a lot of people don't like him. But he refused to sign one because he said it would be a sculpture, like it would be an addition. So he signed a Pez business card, but he later did a drawing for Henry. And
wow.
But I would give people things, like I would give them this audio project. I do this 3-minute calling project, Cough Park, that I do. And I would give people catalogs of mine or zines, and they'd often get me to sign one, and then I would get them to sign something. So it was like a trade, like a barter thing. And like, so it's kind of, some people saw it as like elevating people over other people. And they think they took it kind of the wrong way. And sometimes I would ask people for signatures that were maybe less known even than myself, maybe. And so they were like, that's really weird. Like, why are you asking me this? And then I would go to openings with embarrassed friends because it was a real career sabotager. The collection's worth a fortune now.
But addictive. Like
I would go out all night. Like I would go out like in the afternoon. I'd go to Build TV, and I'd meet like I don't know, like the guy from Oingo Boingo. The guy who did the Batman. Danny Elfman. Yeah, I'd meet Danny Elfman, and then I'd go after that, and I'd go up to Broadway, and I'd try to like chase down Sting or like or
with your Pez and your Sharpies.
or like Bruce Springsteen would be outside his limo with his arm up in the air, and there'd be a crowd, and I'd take a really crappy picture because my phone was so bad. And then I'd go to like Caroline's after that and try to meet one of the comedians, meet Tom Green or something. And I had a different crew of people I was hanging out with, and they were real characters. Like this guy, Tennessee Jeremy Jones Kane. I had to tell him I couldn't hang out with him anymore. I felt really bad. He was trying to get me to pee in phone booths and eat dumpster dive sushi, and like, he's a sweet guy, but it was crazy. And he knew all the doors with the stage doors and I was the worst. Like, this is how bad I was. Like, one day, Jeremy and I and Henry, my youngest son, because I'd bring my kids along with me, which is crazy. And there's a movie coming out on this. I was
just going to ask about that, yeah.
But I literally thought Robert De Niro, Martin Scorsese was Robert De Niro, and my youngest son recognized him from The Simpsons. It was freezing cold anyway, but they were filming The Irishman in the neighborhood. But anyway, Jeremy was a character, and I started meeting all these, the whole... there could be a whole book written on like autographs, and it's nothing what you think it's like, actually.
Well, it sounds like you really did tap into something that you said at one point I was reading, and I thought that was really interesting. You said really competitive. Really competitive.
I've told this story to a few people. Michael J. Fox would be coming down the street, and there'd be 3 helicopters tiered above each other, following him, walking down the street. And then there'd be like a bar in front of, he'd walk up to the Letterman show, and we'd be across the street, and they'd be like rocking the bar, and he'd be signing, and he had like a tremor. And and so competitive. People have posters, and they'd be going, you had to stand on your tippy toes and go over, people would go over top of you, you had to stand up. And then if someone didn't like you or something you said, they'd sign across the face. And then it got really a lot of racial tension, and people hired, and then you get these young black kids saying, keep it black, and like it was really wild. And like I got almost into fights at them, and it was wild.
There's almost something like a picture of American life that
Yeah,
you're
but
capturing.
it was so like butterflies when the people came out. It was like a illness, but then sometimes also like with my mental health issues, which we haven't talked about too much, I didn't think it was very healthy to be around that. Like there'd be people at certain events at Carnegie Hall, and they'd have like hospital wristbands, and like they would follow people around like almost like stalkers, and it was the real deal. You know, these like we would get on like I would get on like Entertainment Tonight in the background. I'd be singing beside Bill Murray on the last episode of the Letterman show, and he'd be covered in cake and and like it just, and then I wasn't making artwork anymore.
Right.
But the Pez thing just really stretched into this, and my kids got less involved with it, and then they were a bit embarrassed by me, and I don't know. Yeah, it was like not like it was like Duchamp playing chess or something for a segue, but it was just it was a bizarre 5 years. Like, and now I have these trunks full of Pez,
Yeah.
and that are signed, and I was going to try to donate them to the Smithsonian because I had it in with this. Anyway, this is a long story.
No, it's great. And just
But the movie Serena's
I was
doing,
gonna
like,
say,
she
tap us
followed
off.
us, Serena McCarroll, for she's followed us for 8 or 9 years, and we were even working on it recently. And my kids have doubled in size, and I would often do a confessionals sometimes at times, just like what was going on in my thoughts in my life, and I'd stop doing signatures and like we'd stop the Pez Museum, and but then I went heavy into this audio project I do now. So
Yeah.
anyway, so there's different facets, you know, like not saying I'm like John Lennon or anything, but like, but you know, he would have with the Beatles, like he would be into the Maharishi, and then he would be into scream therapy, and then like, you know, you go into different phases of your life,
Yeah.
right? Where you have different. Anyway, yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if anybody has any questions right now for Jason to bring you into the conversation. Well, anybody, if you do have questions, throw up your hand and I'll link you in at any point in time. I'm wondering now, because you still do zines, it's still part of your practice.
Yeah.
And I mentioned right off the top that you have a 30-year history, a 30-year experience of doing zines. Has your zine practice changed over the past? Can you see how it's evolved since you started doing zines? And
I generally try not to sell them if I can. I sometimes give them away a lot and leave them places or trade them.
Yeah.
But a lot of black and white ones. But I don't spend a lot of money on them. And I was using a copier at my studio, but recently I had a studio fire, and I didn't talk about it much, but and so I have no access to a free copier anymore, because I used to really pay for my rent by using the copier as much as I could. Like I would just go there late at night and max out the copier, and you know, but yeah, I was just yeah, I mean, sometimes, you know, you go through different themes. I started doing a lot of comedy zines. There's comedy zines here.
yeah,
Like I got really heavily into comedy, and
I think I saw Mitch Hedberg. And
yeah, Mitch Hedberg and
I
Phil
wrote-
Hanley, the comedian, and
Yeah.
Richard Pryor, and yeah, that's been a real, like, listening to a comedian and a special, and then doing an interaction with sampling from a comedy album or a recording or something. So yeah, it's been like kind of a theme lately, and I've been giving them to a lot of comedians at comedy events and stuff.
Right.
So in the same way, I would get a signature, but I would give someone something, and sometimes they would say, "How much do you want for this?" I'm like, "No, it's for you." Like, just try to like branch into that. I guess secretly, I kind of want to do comedy, and like, and in some way, you know, like it'd be fun. So.
Right. Well, I remember I was looking at one of the zines, and you have the Mitch Hedberg inspired zine, and it features the punchlines like, "An escalator cannot break, can only become stairs." So there's something about the comedy
that's
zine
actually
format.
one of his lines from his comedy, and he died on the zine's called April Fools. He died on April, like his funeral was on April Fool's Day, and he was very like in third person, and like his wife was Canadian, which I haven't met her, but very fascinating. He got heavily involved with drugs and alcohol, but I don't know exactly he died. I believe probably something to do with that. I'm not exactly sure. I can't recall exactly his history, but it was. I rely on humor a lot. To deal with
Right.
depression and mental health, and just keeping positive. Like something to turn to sometimes when things are a bit rough. So.
Right.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that Felix and Henry aren't maybe have steered a little bit away from the Pez project.
Completely. Yeah.
But zines, I saw quite a few zines that you made together.
They've done a lot in the early years. Both of them had taken parts in zine fairs.
Do they still do that with you?
Henry draws a little bit. Felix not so much anymore. They both got into filmmaking a bit.
Oh.
Felix was doing experimental. My oldest son was doing experimental films, and he was starting to submit to festivals. But lately he's been really involved with wanting to go for finance and business and economics, and he I've talked. People have asked me how the kids are, and he's wearing like dress pants and dress shoes, and Henry's working. He's going to a film school in Queens and doing a lot of skateboard videos. And they want to do the kids. You want to do something different than your parents, right?
Yeah.
Like just not like rebelling, but just kind of have their own personality, right? And I'm fine, but I have a feeling Felix will eventually get back into film a little bit. I was telling someone recently, I think he might work with his brother or something. I don't know. I just have this feeling that he'll learn a lot of savviness about the business world and then branch into doing some film related things because his knowledge of film is really great.
Yeah. Well, you do some animation. One of the projects that you recently did with, I think, Jimmy Pantalon and
Jason Zampano.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, some of the records here for sale, Jason Zampano's Cyrillic typewriter records. I've been working with him for 20 years, actually, which is crazy. But he kind of got me involved with doing animation for it's a script he'd writ, he directed and did the music for, and we showed the animation like all over the world, like we showed in Athens and France and Bulgaria and New York and Picton, Ontario, so the animation was tricky because it's so much work and doesn't really pay the bills sometimes, but I had it at the Forest City Film Festival here, and
oh wow,
and it was it's nice to go to a screening and do a question and answer or a talk and some, but then sometimes it's a new medium for me. Now that's the first piece we did was 16 minutes long, and which is long for your first animation ever. But it just ended at Stratford Art Gallery. It was being projected outside.
Part of the festival lights, I think it's
But I might do some more animations, shorter pieces, 2 or 3 minutes or something like that.
Yeah. That's very cool. Well, I know you've got lots of projects on the go. You always do. So I thought I'd ask, and if anybody has a question, you can jump in as well. What do you have that's coming up that's got you busy and you'll be on to next?
Well, I'm taking part in the Up With Art here at the Museum London.
Everybody should get a ticket to go to Up With Art
tomorrow, and I did a T-shirt design for that, and it's raising money for homelessness, and also for Museum London, and to the Unity Project. And I'm going then to Toronto, and then the 10th, I have a 2-person show at Vanderplas Gallery in New York, and then on the 11th, I have an online show with Jay Isaac through Peter Edzey, his online auction house. We're showing student drawings. Actually, some of them were from a zine that we did together, and all sorts of stuff. Everything from my smart car went to the Children's Museum here that's eventually opening. There's I'm doing this show in Germany. This young kid named Michaela Carr. Sometimes I forget what I've promised to do, and then I start looking at the list, and I'm like, wow. And I'm still. I think I'm gonna do a little something. I'm screening some animation up in Sault Ste. Marie.
Oh wow!
And I'm gonna do a book project that's loose, but with this guy Alia Rosenthal, Allen Ginsberg's godson. We're going to do his poetry and writing with my drawings. So that's one of the things. There's so many projects. It's just some come and eventually fall into place. And then sometimes things stray away. I think Kellen that just left was going to do this No Normal Festival, and I think I'm taking part of that here. And like, there's a lot of things in Canada, but a lot of things. I'm showing at a hotel in New York, the Ludlow Hotel, all sorts of stuff, and like more audio projects with Cough Park, and probably a launch, and yeah, I mean, it just keeps busy, just keep it rolling talks, and hopefully come back for Wordsfest, to do something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's something cooking. Yeah, something on the grill. We are so lucky today that Jason actually brought a amazing spread of his own zines, and I'm mindful that we should open it up and have you have the opportunity, whether in this format or to walk through the zines and ask Jason about his zine work, his work with comics, his work with cartoon, and all of the work that you've done that we've had a chance to look through. And I'm going to say goodbye to the folks online as we wrap up. But here on site, you can have a chance to chat with Jason. But beforehand, please join me in thanking Jason for his time today.